candidates. I sat down with the Kentucky senator at the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, where we talked about everything from his plan to fight terror to his new book, Take a Stand, moving beyond partisan politics to unite America. Senator Rand Paul, thanks so much for being on New Day.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so let's start with the question that has tripped up a couple of your GOP other presidential hopefuls this week, and that is, and let me boil it down to its simplest form, was the Iraq War a mistake?
Yes. And I think the reason it's a mistake is still an important one for us going forward, because we've had the same question repeatedly. Is it a good idea to go in and topple a secular dictator and try to build a nation? Are we good at building a nation, and can we build nations in our own image? I think really every time we've toppled a secular dictator in the Middle East, we've gotten something worse and something less stable.
Why is it so hard for others who are running for president, like Marco Rubio and possibly Jeb Bush, to answer that question?
I'm not sure why it's so hard, but it shows some differences between the candidates. And I think if people want another Iraq war, they know who they can vote for. If they want someone who's not very likely to have another Iraq war and will only go to war when we have to, when it's the last resort, when we have to defend America or an American interest, there are going to be some other alternatives.
12 years later, as you know, the U.S. is still grappling with the chaos in Iraq. On Sunday, the key city of Ramadi fell to ISIS. In your new book, you write, quote, "The onus of defeating ISIS is squarely on Iraqis and Kurds." That sounds good, of course, but it doesn't seem to be working. The Iraqi army was not up to the task in Ramadi.
Well, that's a real question, because people are now saying, well, we should have just stayed. But we stayed for a decade. We trained them for a decade. We've given them billions of dollars of weapons. And I've jokingly said, you know what? What we should have bought them is tearaway uniforms, so when they run, they can tear their uniforms off quicker. However, the Kurds are a different story. The Kurds are good fighters. I would go one step further. I would arm the Kurds, and I would also offer them a homeland. If you will fight, and if you will fight to keep people out and to push out these marauders, I'd give you a homeland.
But then why isn't that working in Ramadi? And what about Baghdad? I mean, what would you do if Baghdad were in danger of falling?
Yeah, I'm all for the U.S. Helping and supporting the Iraqis, and we have been. And I'm all for the air power, and I'm for continuing to help the Iraqis and the Kurds with arms and with air support. Ramadi is different. It's not a Kurdish region. You're now talking about a Sunni region. This is ultimately why Iraq has devolved into a failed state, because what we got is a government that's almost entirely Shiite, aligned with Iran, and the Sunnis feel left out. It's also why Americans or Shiites can take the cities, but we can't ultimately hold them and have a lasting peace unless the Sunnis are involved. So it's a very, very complicated situation with many different players, but if the Sunnis are not involved, there will be no lasting peace.
But if you were president and you saw ISIS encroaching on Baghdad, what would the U.S. role be?
Well, right now it would be air support, but the one thing I would be doing in addition to that would be arming the Kurds to a much greater extent than we have been, recognizing the Kurds as a nation. But the other thing I would do is one of the things we did during the surge. People talk about American troops during the surge. The other thing we did is we put a lot of money into assistance to the Sunni chieftains to encourage their support. And if you weigh that amount of money versus what we're spending on other things, I think it would be money well spent to try to encourage the allegiance of the Sunni chieftains once again. I think they will discover, if they haven't already discovered, that life under ISIS is not the greatest for your women, for Christians, for minorities of any sort. I think it doesn't take long for people to grow tired of ISIS. But we also, the only way to get the Sunnis on board is to include them. The Shiite government in Baghdad needs to be more inclusive.
It would be nice if people rejected ISIS and that just solved that. But the problem is that ISIS is growing. And I mean, let's talk about here at home that there's interest in ISIS. And in fact, let's talk about the attack in Garland, Texas. If that attack had been successful, in other words, if the ISIS-inspired terrorists had actually killed the people inside that cartoon drawing contest, what would President Rand Paul have done in retaliation?
Well, the same thing we do all the time, that we should continue doing, is to try to prevent this from happening. If it happens, people have to be punished. I think the one mistake that President Obama made is sort of in downplaying maybe what happened at Fort Hood and saying this is workplace violence, when it was obviously an act of terrorism. I also think that because we've been so enamored at collecting all Americans' records, we haven't spent enough time specifically going after the people who would attack us. The Sonarif boys, we knew that one of them was potentially a plotter. The Russian us off. We interviewed them, but we didn't know that he went back to Chechnya. So I don't think we're spending enough time actually looking at and going after and isolating and looking at the records of people who we have suspicion for. I'm all for that. I think we take our eye off the prize when we look at all Americans' records.
So when you say that you would have dealt with if there was an ISIS attack on the homeland, you mean in a criminal justice way? Or you mean in an anti-terrorism way?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure how it's different. If Simpson had shot somebody and we didn't kill him on the spot there, he would have been tried in a regular American court for murder, and he would have gone to prison or been put to death.
Sure. I mean, the argument is getting to the root of the problem. So not just dealing with them as they pop up in a criminal justice way, trying them, getting to stop the problem at its source.
Right, but then that goes to what I was referring to, as to how we go after terrorists. I think we need to spend more time. I would go deeper into the weeds. See, this is what people misunderstand sometimes about my position. I'm all for going after terrorists. I'm all for the NSA looking at records. But they need to look at records of individuals. This is about the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment says the name has to be on the warrant. You can't put Verizon on a warrant and look at all Verizon customers. You put that gentleman Simpson's name, and then you look at his phone records. And the next set, I don't care how many hops into the records you go, as long as you have suspicion, someone's name on the warrant, and a judge signs the warrant.
Of all of the GOP presidential candidates, you are the most vocal opponent of the Patriot Act. Some of your fellow candidates say that it has been a great tool. It's been a great tool in protecting the homeland.
Yeah.
Do you disagree with them?
Yeah, they're wrong. I mean, the Privacy Commission recently came out, and originally the government said, 52 people have been captured through this bulk collection of records. But when the Privacy Committee looked at this, and then with the Senate Committee looking at this, they found nobody that was actually captured by the bulk collection of records.
Well, I mean, what the Intelligence Committee has said, and the former chairman of that, Mike Rogers, who's now a CNN analyst, and he stands by this today, is that there were 54 terror attacks around the world that were stopped by this metadata collection. So terror attacks that were thwarted, including the 2009 New York City subway.
There are people who disagree with him, including the Privacy Committee that looked at all of this and disagrees with him. So you can have disagreements. The people on our side who believe in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and privacy, we have a more difficult time, though, because they don't give us the intelligence information. I get to see very little. The Intelligence Committee gets to see 100 times more than I get to see. And the thing is you're getting the information given to you by people who believe in this bulk collection of records. So you're only getting one side. We don't get a two-sided evaluation of any of this. On the Intelligence Committees in recent history, Ron Wyden has been a champion for privacy and the Bill of Rights. There's been very few others that I think have a balanced or a nuanced approach as far as protecting the individual's right to privacy.
Let me ask you the question from the flip side, and that is, do you know any innocent Americans, or know of any innocent Americans who've been caught up in the dragnet of phone record collection?
I don't get any of the information, so if there were, no one would tell us.
But do you fear that? Is that what you fear, the reason that you
let me finish the point. The point is that the Director of National Intelligence came and said the program didn't even exist. So how could I ever trust them to actually reveal if they're abusing the system? Now, there were some press reports that some people who worked at the NSA were spying on their girlfriend and their boyfriend to see where they were. There have been some instances. But even if there were zero, what Madison said about government and what Madison said about laws is that if government were comprised of angels, we wouldn't have to worry about giving them power. Government will never be comprised of angels, and that's why, whether there's been an abuse or not, I worry about restraining power and making them obey. You know, I think it was Henry said the chains of the Constitution were to bind the politicians. That's what I worry about, that we enforce it.
Quickly, I want to ask you about the vote to reauthorize the Patriot Act. It's coming up this week, or the House version of it called the Freedom Act, this week in the Senate. All eyes on you. Are you going to filibuster this?
I'll do whatever it takes to stop it. Whether or not I'm allowed to filibuster is another question. There's sort of a paper filibuster that you can always do, demanding that there's 60 votes and objecting, not giving them consent to proceed. That I will do. So I will do a formal filibuster. Whether or not that means I can go to the floor, some of that depends on what happens, because you're not always allowed. People don't realize this, but you have to get to the floor when the floor allows you to come. So whether that happens or not, I will filibuster the Patriot Act, and I'll do everything I can to try to adhere to the court.